As you know, creating a course is not as simple as deciding what chapters you want a student to read and putting together a few quizzes. Creating a course involves locating supporting materials and videos, writing assignments, discussions, exams, etc. Have you ever considered how well the students are learning what you are teaching them? How do you know what they're learning? After taking this course, you'll be able to write learning objectives, create graded and ungraded activities that align with learning objectives, identify alignment of activities with objectives, and identify gaps in the learning path. A well-constructed lesson is a perfect balance between the learning objectives, the graded activities, and the ungraded activities. Each element is supporting the next. Without all three parts working together, students are less likely to be successful or motivated. Many times, instructors begin course creation from a teaching-centered perspective. That is, when you begin putting together a lesson, many times the first thought is about what you want to tell the student. Which chapters do you need to cover, or what topics do you want them to know about? The course structure is built around these chapters and topics. As an instructor working from a learner-centered perspective asks what they want the students to know, do, or value at the end of a lesson. The answer to this question develops into the learning objective. Objectives, unlike goals, are specific, measurable statements. Goals are broad statements of intent and can contain multiple objectives. For example, saying you plan to lose weight as a New Year's resolution is an example of a goal. Saying you plan to lose 15 pounds in 6 months as your New Year's resolution is an objective. Learning objectives, then, are specific, measurable statements about what students will be able to do, know, or value at the end of a lesson or course. Which of the following are examples of objectives? Review the skeleton, visit the library, analyze a journal article, name all the bones of the skull, explain how agility relates to your professional life, and understand character traits. The correct answers are analyze a journal article, name all the bones of the skull, and explain how agility relates to your professional life. In order to construct an effective learning objective, it's helpful to use Bloom's taxonomy to guide you. Bloom's taxonomy was created in the late 1950s and updated in 2001. The purpose of the taxonomy is to categorize learning objectives into levels of complexity and specificity. Within each level of the taxonomy, you will find associated verbs that best represent the level of complexity of that level. For instance, if you were writing an objective for the remember level, you might choose a verb such as identify or recall. In our example, consider that you want your students to be able to pick out and name all the bones in the human skeleton at the end of the lesson. Your objective would be, at the end of this lesson, you will be able to name all the bones in the human skeleton. The most important things about having learning objectives is that they are specific and measurable. Once you've written your objective, how are your students going to demonstrate what they are able to do, know, or value what you have stated? What graded activity will you create so they can demonstrate it? With our example from earlier, name all the bones in the human skeleton, you can create several different types of graded activities that would allow students to demonstrate their knowledge. Which of these are possible activities for naming all the bones in the human skeleton? Label a diagram, a drag and drop quiz, a short paper, label an X-ray, or a discussion question. These examples ask for the student to either write in or drag the name of the bones to their corresponding location. For a higher level of complexity, you have more variety available for graded activities. For instance, consider the objective. After completing this lesson, you will be able to judge the efficiency of sampling techniques. This objective falls under the Evaluate level of Bloom's taxonomy. Because students are using higher order thinking skills, the types of assignments are more involved and the deliverables may be more complex. Which of the following are examples of graded activities for the objective Judge the efficiency of sampling techniques? A discussion question, a fill-in-the-blank quiz, a diagram, a case study. The discussion question and a case study are examples of graded activities for the objective Judge the efficiency of sampling techniques. Once you've created the graded activities that will assess the objectives for your lesson, you're ready to identify the ungraded activities that will support both the objectives and the graded activities. The purpose of the ungraded activities is to provide information that will help the students be successful in accomplishing what you've said they should be able to know, do, or value at the end of the lesson. Some examples of ungraded activities include mini lectures, PowerPoint presentations, Prezis, text and publisher materials, worksheets, H5P interactions, audio playlists, videos, websites, articles and journals, book chapters, and MindTap and publisher activities. No matter what you choose to include, remember that it needs to support the objectives and the graded activities. Claudia has written a lesson on mastering academic searches in the library. Her learning objective is, after completing this lesson, you will be able to analyze how the results of a search are affected by various search criteria. What are the key things she should consider when creating her graded activity? She has a greater variety of graded activities to choose from. She has written a specific measurable goal. She wants her students to think at the analyzed level of Bloom's taxonomy, or she's working from a teaching perspective. Claudia has a much greater variety of activities to choose from because she's chosen an objective at the analyzed level of Bloom's taxonomy. She can create an activity such as a paper that compares and contrasts the effectiveness of different search criteria on the results of a search. She could ask students to create a presentation that ranks each search criteria in order of effectiveness. It can be overwhelming to keep track of all the objectives and activities and which goes to which. Consider using the planning matrix to help you plan out your learning path and track alignment between your learning objectives, graded activities, and ungraded activities. In the week character trait column, include a title for each week, the character trait covered in the week, and a summary of topics, concepts, and procedures that you will cover. In the week objectives column, add objectives that state what the student should be able to do in terms of activities that can be observed. Show how you will assess each objective in parentheses after the objective. For example, after completing this lesson, you will be able to analyze family systems, meta-theories, and define a personal theory of family. And in parentheses, it says research paper. In the introduction column, write a short paragraph that briefly summarizes what the lesson is about. The purpose of this introduction is to establish context, point out what is important, to help the students understand the relevance of the topic. This introduction paragraph is the written equivalent of what you might say at the beginning of a new learning segment in a face-to-face class. In the ungraded activities column, indicate how students will learn the information. For example, readings, lesson notes, mini lectures, and videos. Provide specific details, the URL, textbook page numbers, etc. What guidance and support will you provide? For example, study guides, partially worked problems, example papers, answers with feedback. Indicate how students will practice what they learn. with non-graded quizzes, discussions, worksheets. In the graded activities column, describe how mastery of the objectives will be assessed. For example, quizzes on fractions, a small group discussion on the pros and cons of capital punishment, a research paper, a case study. Ask yourself the question, how will students show me that they have learned what is stated in the objective? Each graded activity should include a short description of what will be covered by that assignment. For example, here's the discussion question. The discussion title, Management versus Servant Leadership. You are part of the HCG team. Your leader is a good manager. What are some of the things that a person does that makes them a really good manager? What are some of the things that a person could do to become a really good servant leader? Respond to peers. How would a manager respond to a team member who is not performing? How would a servant leader respond? How would emotional intelligence be important to this situation? Having this short description in your planning matrix will help you as you get ready to write out the full content later on. Once you've populated your planning matrix with your content, how will you know if your learning objectives, graded and ungraded activities, are aligned? First, check to see if you have at least one graded activity for every objective. You can have more than one objective assessed by one graded activity, for example, several objectives assessed by a final exam. Second, make sure that all your graded activities are aligned with an objective. You should be able to verify this if you documented the activity type in parentheses next to the objective when you filled out the planning matrix. If you find an orphaned graded activity, you must either remove the activity, determine whether it needs to be reworded to align with an existing objective, or add a new objective. Finally, review the ungraded activities. Verify that the materials you've selected are relevant, that they support the objectives, that they enable the learner to practice concepts before the graded activity is due. We're looking at a planning matrix for a 1 credit hour class about study skills. Let's see if we can identify the problems with the planning matrix by choosing from the list of problems at the top. First, the two forums do not have an objective. In order to make this align, you would either A, delete the forums, B, write an objective to align with the forums, then C, in this example, write forums that meet the criteria of an effective discussion. All objectives must have a graded activity. Since there's an objective for the graphic organizer, the activity should be moved to the graded activity column. If there were an objective for the forums, they should also be in the graded activity column. Typically, students are less likely to participate in ungraded discussion forums. Since this course is only a 1 credit hour course, there are too many graded assignments for 1 week of work. After making all the corrections to the alignment of objectives and graded activities, there's even more work to do. Be sure to keep in mind how much workload you're putting on yourself and your students as you create your lessons. What's the answer to this statement? Every objective will have at least one graded activity. The answer is true. All objectives will have at least one graded activity. You can have multiple objectives align with one graded activity, like with a quiz or an exam, for instance. You can also have multiple graded activities aligned with one objective. For instance, you may have a graded activity that is a quiz and a graded activity that is a discussion that both align with one objective. At the end of the day, all objectives must have at least one graded activity. Once you've completed the planning matrix and reviewed it for alignment, you should be able to see where you have too much content or not enough content to support the learners. A common issue is including too many readings or videos into a lesson without considering whether they align to the learning objectives. Another common issue is trying to assess too many objectives with one graded activity. Often, this is in an attempt to reduce grading load. Consider dividing up the larger activity into smaller ones and grade one as a peer-reviewed or reflection activity. In this graduate level course, you can see that there is some misalignment between what is in the ungraded activities column, the objectives, and the graded activities. Specifically, the articles the students are being asked to read are not related to any of the objectives and do not prepare students in any way for the assignments in the graded column. It is not clear whether they will prepare students for the upcoming book report reflection, but since the assignment states it is a book report, chances are they won't. The most important thing to look for as you review your planning matrix is interaction. Does your course have enough interaction? Instructor to student, student to content, and student to student interaction. The interaction model shows how all three elements make up deep and meaningful learning for students. Student to content interaction. Students have interaction with content through the LMS and through access to their texts, the internet, articles, videos, publisher activities, and materials, activities, assignments, etc. Student to instructor interaction. Students interact with the instructor through lectures, mini-lectures, feedback, grades, announcements, and discussion boards. And finally, student-to-student interaction. Students interact with one another through group activities, discussion boards, WebEx sessions, class activities, etc. Not all online courses have student-to-student content built into them. By having this gap, those courses are potentially creating an isolating experience for students. Once your course is completed and reviewed in the planning matrix, you are ready to populate the LMS with your content. You have a logical flow to your information. You have links to all your resources and ungraded activities. You have your graded activities and discussion prompts written out or at least drafted. The only remaining tasks are to complete the syllabus and create any multimedia elements you planned, for example, mini lectures and H5P interactions.